Welcome to the outreach presentation on the revised MassDEP Asbestos Regulation that took effect in June 2014. I'm Mike Elliott, the Asbestos Program Coordinator for the Bureau of Air and Waste at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, also known as MassDEP. In the following presentation, I will guide you through a high-level overview of the regulatory revisions that offer some insight about how these revisions affect the regulated community, such as property owners, contractors, and the construction trades. Ultimately, I hope this information will help everyone to understand the requirements whenever they conduct renovation and demolition activities that require the disturbance or removal of material that contains asbestos. If, after listening to this presentation, you have further questions, my contact information is listed on the last slide. I welcome your comments and questions. After more than 10 years in the making, the MassDEP Asbestos Regulation has been revised. This represents the first major rewrite in 30 years or so. The basic legal structure hasn't changed. There are two regulatory agencies in Massachusetts, the MassDEP and the Department of Labor Standards, or DLS, which together ensure the proper management of materials that contain asbestos. MassDEP implements the State and Federal Clean Air Act statutes to prevent releases of asbestos into the air, as well as to protect public health, safety, and the environment. And DLS enforces state statutes with respect to licensing of contractors qualified to work with asbestos, establishing safe work practices and worker qualification requirements, and certifying competent laboratories that conduct analytical methods for asbestos. The overarching goals of the MassDEP Asbestos Regulation revisions enacted in June 2014 were to clarify definitions and regulatory requirements, incorporate policies that were previously outside the regulation, and better align the state program with the EPA Asbestos National Emissions Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants, or NESHAPs. It is also worth noting that the overlap with the state sanitary code affords an opportunity for interagency cooperation with local boards of health. State sanitary code requires owners of residential buildings to repair or remove damaged asbestos-containing materials in accordance with MassDEP and DLS regulations. The MassDEP Asbestos Regulation focuses on renovation and demolition work involving materials that contain asbestos. The regulation's two fundamental performance standards for these activities have not changed. Whenever you need to disturb asbestos-containing material, you will still need to prevent releases of asbestos fibers to the air, the so-called visible emission standard, and protect public health, safety, and the environment. The essential elements of the program remain unchanged. These elements reflect the typical life cycle of an asbestos abatement project. Notify MassDEP and DLS before starting work. Notifications filed with MassDEP are shared with DLS, so you only need to notify once. Follow specified work practices when conducting the abatement activities, and manage asbestos-containing waste material properly. Please note, DLS's regulations have not changed. In the next two slides, I will highlight a few of the new elements of the revised regulation. While the requirement to conduct a pre-reno demo survey is new to the MassDEP regulation, it is not new to this type of work. Since 1990, EPA's asbestos NESHAP regulation has required a thorough inspection before starting any demolition or renovation activities. This inspection must identify all asbestos-containing material in the area that will be disturbed by the planned work. MassDEP's regulation describes who can conduct the pre-demo reno surveys and what needs to be documented in a written survey report. The revised regulation provides notification exemptions for a limited universe of small jobs involving certain materials. Specifically, the following threshold quantities apply: less than 100 square feet of asbestos cement shingles, siding, and panels, less than 100 square feet of asbestos floor tile and related mastics, or less than 32 square feet of gypsum wallboard and related joint compound. In addition, Certain work on asbestos-containing material at an owner-occupied single-family residence does not have to be reported to MassDEP. This exemption only applies if the owner is working exclusively on non-friable asbestos-containing material, does not cause it to become friable, and does the work himself or herself, that is, does not engage a contractor. By non-friable, we mean material that when dry cannot be crumbled, shattered, pulverized, or reduced to powder by hand pressure. Aside from these limited notification exemptions, the notification requirements continue to apply as they always have in the past. That is, any activity that disturbs or removes any quantity of asbestos-containing material requires notification 10 working days prior to starting the job. Regardless of whether a job qualifies for one of these new notification exemptions, all asbestos abatement activities must be performed in a manner that is consistent with the applicable work practices specified in the regulation. Generally speaking, applicable work practices for the materials that are now exempt from notification include the following: wetting work surfaces with an amended water, which means water with soap or surfactant added to prevent generation of visible dust; carefully lowering roofing and siding shingles to the ground; spreading tarp or plastic sheeting where debris may fall, and cleaning up at the end of each shift; properly packaging waste material in leak-tight, sealed, and labeled waste containers; disposing of waste material at solid waste facilities that have a special waste permit to accept asbestos waste. As I mentioned at the outset, one of the goals of the revised regulation was to provide greater regulatory certainty by codifying established material-specific work practices that were previously found either in policy or guidance. In this regard, new sections were added to the regulation to address the following material-specific work practices: asphalt roofing and siding materials, window glazing and/or caulking compounds, cement shingles, siding and panels, floor tile, and gypsum wallboard and joint compound. Non-traditional asbestos abatement work practices were historically called alternative work practices. This now requires a formal permit application, the Application for Non-Traditional Asbestos Work Practices Approval, or BWP AQ-36, and payment of a $600 fee, if applicable. The post-abatement visual inspection is a new requirement for all jobs that comes at the end of the asbestos abatement activities. It ensures that no visible asbestos-containing debris remains on any of the work surfaces. The waste shipment record is another example where the revised regulation incorporated an existing EPA NESHAP requirement. All shipments of asbestos-containing waste material, or ACWM, must now be accompanied by a waste shipment record that conforms to a template posted on the MassDEP Asbestos website. The revised regulation requires that the owner-operator keep copies of the pre-reno demo survey report and waste shipment record for at least 2 years. If MassDEP does a compliance inspection, the inspector is likely to ask to see these documents and will rely on them in part to determine that the asbestos-containing materials were properly managed. I will now provide a few more details about each of these new regulatory requirements in the following slides. The requirement for a pre-reno demo survey applies to any project with the potential to disturb suspect asbestos-containing material. Before disturbing the material, a DLS-certified asbestos inspector must conduct a thorough inspection, that is, to identify the presence, location, and quantity of any asbestos-containing material or suspect ACM that contains asbestos in any amount. What passes as a thorough inspection could be one thing for a manufactured material where product content is fairly consistent, for example, vinyl asbestos tile, asphalt roofing material, cement shingles and siding, etc. But it could be different for material with inconsistent levels of asbestos content caused by contamination with naturally occurring asbestos minerals, such as vermiculite insulation, or hand-mixed compounds like plaster. In the former case, a limited number of random samples may suffice, but in the latter case, many more samples may be needed, particularly to target areas where asbestos is likely to have accumulated. Once enough samples have been collected, they will need to be analyzed by a qualified laboratory that follows an approved analytical method to find out definitively whether the material contains asbestos or not. The only analytical method recognized by MassDEP is the EPA Method for Determination of Asbestos in Bulk Materials, which goes by the report number EPA/600/R-93/116. Any suspect ACM that is not sampled and analyzed must be presumed to be ACM, identified on the written survey report as ACM, and managed as ACM. In other words, it must be abated prior to renovation or demolition. The pre-reno demo survey is the linchpin of compliance for both the MassDEP and EPA regulations. The survey provides valuable information. It will determine whether notification to the MassDEP is required. It will determine whether you will need to follow applicable work practices to remove asbestos-containing materials safely. It will determine whether you will need to engage a licensed contractor. It will help with sequencing project tasks by identifying which materials contain asbestos and need to be removed before your renovation or demolition can start. It provides a basis for developing a waste management plan that can help you minimize volume and cost of material that needs to be disposed of as ACWM. And it provides the information you will need to comply with waste packaging, transportation, and disposal requirements. To know whether you need to have a pre-reno demo survey done, you will need to know what materials are suspect ACM. Asbestos-containing materials are found in most buildings, even those built after 1980. After successfully enacting bans on the use of asbestos in several individual products in the 1980s, the US EPA adopted a regulation banning all asbestos-containing materials from use in commerce in 1989. However, this rule was struck down in 1991. While asbestos ores are no longer mined or processed in the United States, thousands of products containing asbestos continue to be produced, imported, legally sold, and commonly used in building construction and industrial applications. All this is to say that there remain many, perhaps thousands, of suspect materials on the market today. So contractors and homeowners doing renovation or demolition activities need to be attentive to the likelihood of coming across suspect ACM, no matter the age of the structure. Broadly speaking, the definition of suspect ACM includes any product reasonably likely to contain asbestos based on its appearance, composition, and use. This slide lists a few of the common types of suspect ACM that can be found in buildings. Work on asbestos-containing asphalt roofing or siding requires notification to the MassDEP 10 working days before starting work. While roofing and siding workers need to be trained in accordance with OSHA requirements, there are no DLS asbestos license or certification requirements for the workers performing this work as long as the material remains non-friable. The regulation specifies work practices for managing asphalt roofing and siding that contain asbestos to ensure that the asbestos isn't released into the air. These work practices include isolating heating, ventilation, and air conditioning ventilation intakes, removing roofing material intact as much as possible. Note that roofers can cut roofs into pieces, but where cutting machines are used, the machines must be equipped with HEPA-vac attachments. The cutting surface must be kept adequately wet at all times, and the cut pieces of roofing material must be carefully lowered to the ground. If all the specified work practices are strictly followed, then waste roofing material can be bulk loaded for transport to the disposal facility without a non-traditional work practice approval. Waste can be disposed of at any landfill permitted to accept solid waste. If, on the other hand, the work causes the material to become friable or causes the release of asbestos dust, then the work becomes regulated by DLS, requiring the use of licensed contractors, workers trained and certified as asbestos supervisors and workers, adherence to the full suite of asbestos work practices specified in the regulation, and packaging, transport, and disposal of the waste roofing material as ACWM special waste. Either way, asbestos-containing asphalt roofing material must never be sent to a C&D processor for recycling, because these facilities grind material they receive, and the grinding operation will almost certainly release asbestos fibers into the air. Non-traditional work practices are required when it is unsafe to follow prescribed work practices. For example, it may be unsafe to build plastic containment near a fire hazard or to keep facility components around live electrical equipment wet. This approval is referred to as an NT approval. The NT approval now involves a formal permit application process. One uses the BWP AQ-36 form on MassDEP's website and a $600 fee where applicable. The application must be accompanied by a proposal developed by a DLS-certified asbestos project designer. NT permits are available only for 6 particular circumstances. 1. For demolition of a facility under order of state or local government agency because the facility is structurally unsound. 2. Where ACM or ACWM was discovered after demolition began and now cannot be safely removed with standard work practices. 3. For certain emergency renovation operations. 4. For cleanup and decontamination as a result of work that was not done properly or where there is a safety or public health hazard. 5. Where wetting would damage equipment or present a safety hazard. Or 6. When it is necessary to bulk load ACM and or ACWM. The post-abatement visual inspection is required for all asbestos abatement activities. The only exception is for the owner of an owner-occupied single-family residence who is working exclusively on non-friable asbestos-containing material, does not cause the material to become friable, and does the work himself or herself. In other words, the homeowner does not engage a contractor. The purpose of this requirement is to ensure the job has been thoroughly completed and there is no visible debris left behind on any of the work surfaces. The revised regulation specifies that the final visual inspection must be performed by a DLS-certified asbestos project monitor. Additionally, it must be performed before removing any work area barriers and ventilation systems if they were used. Keeping the barriers and ventilation systems in place ensures that if any further cleaning is required, it can be done safely. The requirement to use a waste shipment record form is another example where MassDEP regulations have been modified to better align with EPA's NESHAP requirements. The use of a waste shipment record form that strictly complies with the template became effective January 1st, 2015. A template for the waste shipment record form can be found on the MassDEP website at the URL link shown on the slide. MassDEP will not provide the forms. Haulers and transportation companies can use the online template, or they can create their own form, but at a minimum, it must contain all the information found on the template. The purpose of the waste shipment record is to ensure that owners and operators track the transportation and disposal of ACWM generated at their job sites. If a completed waste shipment record confirming proper disposal of ACWM is not received within 35 days, the owner or operator must track down the shipment and notify MassDEP within 45 days if there are any discrepancies. Fee increases for both the BWP AQ-04 Asbestos Notification Form, also known as the ANF 001, and the BWP AQ-06 Notification Prior to Construction or Demolition, that went from $85 to $100, became effective in August 2013. In July 2014, 3 new fees were added. A $35 fee for revising the initial ANF 001 or AQ-06 forms, for example, changing the project start or end date. A $200 fee for the BWP AQ-05 blanket notification approval request, and a $600 fee for the NTWP approval request. Asbestos abatement jobs at properties owned by certain types of entities are exempt from MassDEP fees. These include municipalities and municipal housing authorities, counties, districts of the Commonwealth, federally recognized Indian tribe housing authorities, the MBTA, and owner-occupied residential properties with 4 units or less. Please note that 501c3 nonprofit organizations and private educational and health institutions are not exempt from the MassDEP fees. Beginning in March 2015, MassDEP started to audit notifications to ensure that all applicable fees have been paid. Anyone who claims fee-exempt status that does not appear to be eligible will be asked to provide supporting documentation or refile with proper payment. The Asbestos Lookup tool is a useful web resource that anyone can use to see whether a notification has been filed for an abatement project at any given address. Notifications filed through EDEP are added to the lookup tool automatically. Notifications filed on paper forms are added to the database within a day or so of their receipt by MassDEP. The lookup tool can be accessed from the MassDEP website at the link listed on the slide. In Massachusetts, material that contains any amount of asbestos, even less than 1%, is regulated. All materials that contain any amount of asbestos should have been identified during the pre-reno demo survey. ACM identified by the survey needs to be abated before it is disturbed. Material containing less than 1% doesn't need to be abated in accordance with work practices, and you don't need to notify MassDEP before the abatement starts, but you will need to manage the waste material containing less than 1% asbestos as ACWM. If you remove it carefully and keep it separated from your other non-asbestos construction or demolition waste, you can avoid contaminating your solid waste with asbestos and can minimize the amount of material that has to be disposed of as ACWM. One of the main objectives of proper asbestos management during a reno demo project is to prevent contamination of construction and demolition debris by materials that contain any amount of asbestos. This is because a C&D processing facility usually grinds some of the material it receives and can release asbestos fibers into the surrounding air and pose a health risk to facility workers and possibly to the general public as well. It is worth noting that C&D processors have conditions in their operating permits that prohibit them from accepting ACM or suspect ACM. If ACM or suspect ACM shows up in a load, the cost of managing the load as ACWM will be passed on to the original generator, and the MassDEP will be notified of the permit violation for further investigation. The MassDEP Asbestos Regulation requires that all ACWM is managed in accordance with the specified packaging, transportation, storage, and disposal provisions. In simplest terms, material that contains asbestos in any amount, even less than 1%, has to be segregated and properly managed during the renovation and demolition project. It has to be packaged and labeled as ACWM, and it has to be disposed as special waste at a permitted solid waste management facility. If you desire further detailed information, this slide provides links to relevant regulation and guidance documents. Or you can always call one of us on the MassDEP program staff with specific questions by phone or email at the contact information listed on the slide. For information or help with filing asbestos forms, EDEP, or the asbestos database, you can submit your question by email to the Bureau of Air and Waste EDEP mailbox, or you can call the asbestos hotline. For questions about permits or compliance at a specific job site, feel free to contact one of the regional staff in the appropriate MassDEP region for the town in which the project is located. If you're not sure which region of MassDEP your town is located in, you can click on the Find Your Region link. Thank you for your attention during this overview of the revised asbestos regulation. We hope the slide presentation was helpful, and we welcome your feedback.